Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Nordic Football Podcast. And this is our first of 2025. So, who else should we be joined by other than a special guest? My name is Jonathan Fadugba, and we've got no Steve Wiss today. He's away doing different things, but we do have a very special member of the podcast. I almost basically consider him part of the podcast, to be honest. He's like pod family. It's Tom Dent. Tom Dent, the now manager of Raufoss IL or EL. Don't know, you might pronounce that better than me, Tom. But I'm delighted to be joined by the Englishman who we've had on this podcast many times over the years. We can almost chart your career through, like I said just a minute ago, your appearances on the podcast. But Tom, welcome to the show, and we're looking forward to talking to you about management and many other aspects. How's things?
Yeah, things are good. Busy. Been obviously a change from being in the shadows as an assistant to being the big boss. But absolutely enjoying it so far. Had a really good start to pre-season. Lots of good work gone down with the players and what we want to try and do. So right now, can't be happier.
The big boss indeed. And funnily enough, mentioning about the big boss, you have previously been a big boss a couple of years ago when we had you on this pod. So the first place to start really is, of course, you were at Ham Kam last season and you've been there for a few years in terms of your role as assistant manager. And that was in Eliteserien, of course. And before that, at Stjørdals-Blink as the head coach in 2021 to 2022, when we had you on the pod as well. So you've now taken the decision. Obviously, it was announced at the back end of last year, and you started the role beginning of January, I believe, at Raufoss, which is back in OBOS. So talk to us about how did this all come about, Tom?
No, I mean, the first thing to say with Ham Kam was that it was a completely mutual end. It was from my side, I felt like that it's been 3 really good years with Jakob, but I felt like I needed something a little bit different. And Jakob has just re-signed again for the next 2 years, and the club felt like they wanted a little bit different. So it just felt like a natural time to part ways. Was a bit excited to see what happened because I parted ways or decided to leave, or we mutually decided to leave without really knowing what the next step looked like. So I was wondering what the freelance market was going to be like. And then a few days after it was announced, I got a phone call from Raufoss asking if I'd be interested to talk about their head coach position. And basically within a week, we had a couple of meetings, a couple of interviews. And the more I talked to them and the more we sort of discussed 25, then the more I realized that I was ready to be a head coach again, more than I originally thought, because I was originally thinking maybe going as an assistant somewhere else. And yeah, it was all agreed really quickly. And as I said, started, I think the first training was 7th of January. I tried to have a little bit of holiday during Christmas, but not always easy. But we started up middle of January. We've just come back from Turkey after a very good week's training camp there. All systems go.
So do you think, was there kind of, I mean, from the sounds of what you mentioned there, it sounds like you may be out of contracts at Ham Kam. Had there been maybe whispers about other, you've mentioned you're preparing for freelance work. Had there been rumblings, or how did the move come about? Was it random, or had there been whispers prior to that, or was it out of the blue, like you said, completely out of the blue?
No, I know now, having spoke to them since, that I was on an original shortlist and my name got moved up when they found out that I wasn't continuing. I think, obviously, with the success that Ham Kam have had the last 3 years and the fact that Jakob was extending, it was perhaps given originally as a given that I was going to extend as well. So actually, when the news came out that I wasn't, I think that was when activity, like I had a couple of questions about it. What did you want to do, and what would you consider something like this? And so I think it was more of a case of that there was probably more work done in the background than I'd originally realised. But when I made a decision and it was public, then obviously that makes things a lot more easy to handle. And as you say, I was out of contract. It was something I thought about for a long time, but it felt right. That was the only thing I say it without saying anything bad about Ham Kam. And as I say, the more I went through the process, the more I realised I was perhaps more ready to be a head coach than I was an assistant. And that was a nice feeling, actually, because and to be honest, it's also been confirmed since I've been back in the big chair. you know, things have been a lot easier than I was. The I was a head coach when everyone was new. It was the first time. It was the first time I'd worked with a senior team at that level. Whereas now, having 4 years later, I feel like I've got a lot more experience. I've got a lot more knowledge, and I've got a lot more understanding on what I actually want to, how I want to lead a team, and how I want to work with a team, and that's coming out already now. I think we've done a lot of really, really good work. The players have been excellent to work with in Raufoss. Very loyal, very hardworking, very attentive, want to learn. Makes my job very, very easy then as a head coach. And yeah, we've had a mixed bag of results, a win, draw, and a loss. But we seem to be going in the right direction, while there is still a lot more work to be done.
Now, tell me a bit about the city Raufoss. You know, it's kind of, according to Wikipedia anyway, the population is about just under 10,000. So it's a small sort of town. Tell me about this, the sort of history of the club, maybe compared to Ham Kam as well, and what attracts you from that point of view in terms of moving to Raufoss, and what the potential aspirations are for this season, and maybe looking forward as well, you know, in terms of your tenure, what you're looking to set out and achieve at Raufoss.
Well, Ham Kam is, if you imagine Ham Kam Raufoss, they're on either side of Norway's biggest lake called Mjøsa. And Ham Kam is known as a massive sports town. And then you have a small place next to it called Brumunddal, and that's like in the shadows. And they were okay high up in the system as well, not so long ago. But it's always been sort of figured that Brumunddal was in the shadows of Hamar. If you look at Raufoss on the other side of the lake, there's a biggest town close to Raufoss called Gjøvik. And Gjøvik is like, probably, it's a little bit smaller than Hamar, but it's twice the size of Raufoss, give or take. And they've had like a ice hockey team, and their football team was playing in the league above not so long ago, like the one below OBOS, but quite high. So Raufoss has been for a long time in the shadow. But what Raufoss is known for historically, it's all been like industry place. So always where there's a lot of sort of people that move there for work. They've got an international school close by. So it's always been known for being a place for foreigners, which is ironic now. But the thing that's defined the football team for years upon years upon years is that it is an extremely hard-working club. For a club that is the size that it is, it's got everything you could need. Like I have a gym, a swimming pool with facilities like ice baths and saunas and stuff. I have a 11-a-side pitch with floodlights. I have a full-size 11-a-side pitch in a hall, and I have a gym, all within 200 meters of each other, which there are not many clubs at our level in OBOS that has that. So there's a lot of things that are there to have as professional life as possible for the players. There's a fantastic volunteer group that run all of these facilities. Gym and the pool is owned by a former player. There's a lot of veterans that sort of clean around and manage the stadium and keep everything in order. And they do a lot of fundraising for the club and everything like that. And then the history of Raufoss in recent years, from when Christian Johnsen was there and took them up in 2017, it's been a springboard club. So a lot of players have come to Raufoss to either launch their career, restart their career, or come from lower level up and then go out to the bigger world. I can try and name you all of the names, but I'll forget some of them. You have Metler from Sandefjord now, who sold for 1 million kroner last year. Emil Breivik was on loan there in 2020, I think, and his first Molde game was in the Europa League last year. You have Brattbakk, who was on loan there from Rosenborg. Solo Wusu, who's now in Odd and has been linked elsewhere, was there. Who else is there? Loads. I can't think of any more at the minute, but there's been countless names of people going there and springboarding elsewhere. And it's purely because they have a culture of wanting to be better, wanting to work hard. They understand they don't go to Raufoss to be millionaires, but they can be millionaires when they leave. And that's sort of the thing that attracted me. That I was going to get a group that was coachable. I was going to get a group that wanted to be better. I was going to get a group that would work extremely hard. And I've obviously come from a higher level, so that means that I can hopefully pull them closer to that higher level. So for the size of the town, it really is a success story and something that was really exciting to be part of. And I'll leave you with the slogan of the club has been for many years, Liten blant the Store, which translates directly as the little one amongst the big ones, or a little one amongst the giants. So they are very used to fighting against the teams that have much bigger budgets and much bigger against their weight. So for the club to finish, I think it's 8th and 7th in almost the last 2 years with the budget that they've had and the available players is fantastic, really.
Sounds like a bit of a sort of underdog spirit there at Raufoss. And the club finished 8th in OBOS last season. Interestingly enough, the previous manager is a Swedish manager, and he's now moved on to Stjørdals, I believe. So that's quite an interesting sort of, you mentioned the transition, maybe players becoming millionaires. Even it looks like the manager maybe has moved on to a sort of bigger opportunity potentially. Tom, obviously we've talked about, your time at Blink, and we've had you on this podcast before. So anyone who is a long-time listener or who digs into the archives can sort of track your evolution from that point of view. But I'd like to ask you, in terms of going from a manager to an assistant manager to a manager again, what are the key differences between being an assistant manager and a manager? Because the most obvious answer there would be, obviously, you're in charge of the team, you pick the team. But I would imagine there's a lot of key different sort of nuances and maybe things you've picked up along the way. So could you talk about maybe the key differences between sort of being an assistant and being a manager? Not necessarily in terms of day-to-day tasks, but also, how your responsibilities within the club in the different roles, maybe things that you can delegate, or that you're more responsible for one role than the other, that kind of thing.
I think the biggest thing judged to that is that the role of manager has changed in general, alongside the, we talk about squads being bigger of players, but staff is now a lot bigger. For a club like Raufoss, that isn't the case. But when I first walked into Ham Kam, there was one manager in Jakob Mikkelsen, one assistant manager in myself, a physio/physical coach, and a goalkeeper coach. There was 4 members of staff that were in that squad, and technically speaking, me and the manager were the only ones that were full-time in the first team. The other 2 were part-time with different responsibilities within the club. When I left, there was 2 assistants, a manager, a physio, fitness coach, who were all full-time, a goalkeeper coach that was close to full-time but not quite full-time. You had a sports chief. So the staffs in general are getting bigger, and even Ham Kam's evolution showed that. With that, then, the delegation, as you talk about, comes about. Or the manager's role now is making sure everything functions. So the manager's role then is about making sure that, they might be a coachy manager, like they don't have control of the coaching, but then the assistants then have a role to fill in the gaps. So it might be with analysis, might be with scouting, might be with individual follow-up, might be the goalkeepers, might be the young players. There's lots of different roles within that. As an assistant, then it's the other way, because as an assistant, your job then is to fill the needs of the manager. So my job as assistant Ham Kam changed as the staff got bigger. When I first got there, it was to have sort of half the trainings based on the offensive play. It was the set plays. It was the analysis of our own team, and it was any individual follow-up. When I left, it was all the video analysis. It was a bit less coaching, and it was more individual follow-up, and it was set plays. Doesn't mean it was right or wrong. It just means that as the staff gets bigger, that was the roles that were delegated to me from the head coach. So the main thing that's changed now is that as a head coach, you have to lead far more than just the players. You have to lead the staff. You have to set the direction. You have to make sure you lead above as well. So when you're talking to the board or sporting directors, that you have a connection there, and you're sort of the bridge between the two. Whereas an assistant, you find yourself as a coach hopefully appointed because you have an X factor or a skill set that's required in that complete staff setup. So that's really where the difference is. As a manager, you kind of have to you set the trend, and then you try and get people around you that can fill in the holes.
And how much, from an assistant manager's point of view, because if you think about a traditional job, for listeners probably maybe don't work in football, in a traditional job, you'll have a job description and your role. how much say do you have or control do you have maybe as an assistant, as in your time in Ham Kam over the past, several years? How much, because as you mentioned there, the club evolves, maybe new people come in, or you might be delegated to a different area, or you might have a particular skill set you're hired for. How much say do you actually have over that? Because as an example, you mentioned that you're doing a lot of video, part of your role evolved to doing more video analysis. If you came in as like a pure coach, for example, you might not have skills in one area. How much control or say do you have? For example, you might say, well, that's not really my skill set, or that's not really my expertise. Or is it really a case of you have to kind of be a sponge and really evolve to what the manager wants, if you get what I mean? Because, like I said, in a rigid job description, it might be like, okay, I'm an account manager and this is my job. But it sounds like as an assistant manager, it's almost like it's almost like a sweeper role, isn't it? You fill in different holes, maybe in different areas where it's needed. Is that an accurate assessment, and how much would you agree with that sort of element of control or lack of it?
It is, but there's a lot of elements to it. So for the first part, I was a club appointment with Jakob Say. That means to say that I wasn't like, you get a lot of managerial duos, if you call it, that follow each other around. And I think when that happens, then you usually get that because the manager knows what he gets from his assistant and he can fill the holes particularly to what the manager needs. And because they have that trust, then the manager takes them around because they know that then they can get going straight away in a new club. You don't have to use time to get to know each other and things like that. Whereas when I was a club appointment, that means that Jakob delegates or uses me how he needs to use me because that's what the club want me to be used. Like that's how it is. The second part of that is that I'm a young coach. I'm despite the fact that I've evolved through your podcast through the years, I am still only 33. So it means that if my life situation was different, if my home situation was different, then maybe I would think differently about it because, maybe I don't want to chase, maybe the job descriptions you describe it is more important than the level I work with because that's, I'm at a point now where I need life to be a bit more in control and therefore would rather work on this part of the role. I've done pretty much every role in my now 12 years in Norway, from youth coach to keeper coach to assistant manager, senior manager, under 19s coach, reserve manager. I've done everything. So it's given me a broad perspective of the role of the coach. And it means then, like even for last year, I had a lot of analysis. I found out afterwards that having so much analysis is extremely time consuming. But it allowed me then to firstly get a better perspective of that it is very time consuming as an analyst. It also allowed me to use a different software and learn how to use that. But it also meant that I had to be better at, when I was presenting players or clips to players, I had to be better at picking out less clips that showed more rather than having 20 clips trying to show everything. I'd try and find 6. And that's a skill now that I'll take with me into Raufoss because even though I'm the manager, I still have to, I'll have to muck in and do more of the tasks because we have a lot smaller staff again. But because I have that broad perspective, it allows me to be able to do those tasks. Whereas if I was an older manager and perhaps wasn't as competent on a computer or with that sort of software, it would mean that we'd already be at a disadvantage because we wouldn't be able to maximise the potential within the staff and the players. So I think it really comes down to, as an assistant, are you a club appointment or are you a manager appointment? That has a lot to say because if you're a management appointment, I would say that your role then becomes a lot more defined because you two work as a pair. He knows what you're getting, you'll know what you're getting, everybody's happy. If you're a club appointment, you're there because the club trust you and they know maybe you're a former player, maybe you have a certain skill set that they want to use, but then you have to find the way to how you work with the manager. So my relationship with Jakob in 24 was much better than my relationship with Jakob in 22 because we had to use 22 to find out the best and worst sides of each other, and then in 23 we found a more common ground, should we say, of how to work and how to think. And then in 24 it was even better again because I could start predicting then what was going to happen with Jakob or what he was going to think or how he was going to respond, and then I could already put things in play So the amount of times he would say, "Can you find me this?" and I'd say, "I've already got it. Here we go," because I knew it was going to come. That's just how you get with a relationship. I like to think that if time later on happens and Jakob got a huge job somewhere and needed an assistant, he might consider me. That's you never know. But that's the benefit of working together. That's how you work these things out.
So for anyone who's sort of maybe listening to this podcast, thinking about going into coaching or management, like you said, you've done every perspective, and it sounds like adaptability is one of the key skills you need, because you just mentioned there, for example, having to learn analysis, and you had to learn a new software pretty much on the job. So adaptability might be one. What would you say are the other sort of key sort of attributes that you need to go into management, whether it's assistant manager or management? You know, if you were giving advice to young, because you're a young coach yourself, there's probably people listening to this who might want to go into coaching eventually, or who have an interest in management. What other key skills would you say you need besides that adaptability to be able to literally learn things on the job?
I think the first thing is you have to learn what you're good at. And that might sound an obvious thing, but everyone has a strength, everyone has a superpower, everyone has a weapon, everyone has an ability within them that not everyone has. So in my case, it's the ability to work with people, and in my case, it's the ability to be adaptable. So it means then that when I do that, then it means that I can put myself in different scenarios. And because I'm good with people, it means that usually we can solve it one way or another. But some people are extremely good at the tactical side, like extremely good to the smallest detail, be able to read an opponent's plays, understand the weaknesses, apply the strengths. Some people are really good communicators. Some people are really good sort of human connectors. So the first thing you have to do is find out what your strength is. The second thing is you need to surround your people that fill out your weaknesses, not because you need to sort of like cover them, but more so you can learn from them. So for example, I learned a huge amount from Jakob now the last 3 years being an assistant to watch a manager, because I learned the inside dealings. I learned about how to manage a board. I learned how to deal with contract situations. I learned to deal with selection headaches. Even though I had that experience in Blink I had it with no reference. So I had no sort of understanding what was right or wrong. I just did it on feeling and what I felt was right and important for me. Whereas having watched it from close hand of someone else do it and be successful, it's given me a lot of tools now to use now. So the first thing, find your strength. The second thing, surround yourself with people that complement what you're perhaps not as good at, so you can learn from them. And the third thing is don't lock yourself into one thing too early, the same as you'd say for a player. So I thought for a long time, my best role in football would be as an assistant manager, because I thought that I wouldn't have the authority. I'm not a shouter or hollerer, or I'm not someone that fills a room and people are scared of. That's not my personality. So for a long time, I felt I'm going to struggle to be a head coach without having that. But what I've learned about myself is that I might not have that as a trait, but what I do have is I'm very good to take responsibility and lead a group. I'm very good to get them together and look in the same direction and point out what's important. That just come with experience. So as I say, I started coaching when I was 16, 15. I'm now 33. So I've nearly been doing it for 20 years now, which sounds insane to say out loud. But that's just something that evolved with time. And as I said, I've done a lot of different roles because I've wanted to understand things. So I'm probably the head coach that's got the most understanding of goalkeeping, which gives me advantage, because most managers say you should have saved that, whereas I can go to the goalkeeper coach and say, what do you think about this? So there would be my 3 bits. Know your strength, surround yourself with people that can help your weaknesses, and don't specialize too early. Just put yourself in different surroundings and have time on the grass, coach, lead, try things, do things, get things wrong, learn from them, reflect.
It's fantastic advice there for any upcoming coaches. And I think that's very valuable knowledge. You still got still got a good 20, 30 years left of your managerial career. So although you've had a huge body of experience so far, I'm sure you've got plenty more to come, my friend. In terms of Ham Kam, let's talk a little bit about Ham Kam. And obviously, one of the questions we're curious as a podcast to sort of understand, because you've sort of done OBOS, you've done the lower league, then you've gone into a Ham Kam in the Eliteserien, and now you're returning to OBOS. Let's just reflect quickly on Ham Kam's season last season and talk to me a little bit about that. And then also, how do you sort of come into an OBOS job? How would you compare the second tier to the first tier at this point in time in terms of Norwegian football in general? How would you see the evolution of Norwegian football in the last sort of 2-3 years?
We say Ham Kam first because that's a quicker answer. I think we obviously had a far more stable pre-season than the year before. The year before, we had an extremely swinging pendulum pre-season. We lost 5-0 to Kongsvinger, we lost 3-0 to Raufoss. We didn't win that many games. We were very late with recruitment. We'd either win games 3-0 or lose them 7-3. It was a very pendulum swung season that we managed to get the result we needed in the end. I think in 24, we had a really good ground level sort of where we had the ability to pick up points. We looked a bit more dangerous, at least for the first 2/3 of the season, where we actually created a bit more. We were a bit more comfortable on the ball. The signing of Luke Morris was a big part to say for that. And we were picking up points. We went from a run in the summer where we went, I think, 5 or 6 unbeaten. We obviously beat Lillestrøm 5-0, which became a bit of a momentous result, especially around here. And then I think we just got a little bit guilty that we kind of lost. I wouldn't say took our eye off the ball, because I can say categorically, we didn't change anything internally. We didn't work any less. We didn't put our focus anywhere else. It wasn't like we took our foot off the gas and we felt we were safe. I just think we kind of forgot the base bit that has made Ham Kam so good the last 3 years about that defensive solidarity, organisation, the ability to find that balance between pressing high, sitting low, keeping the ball, but trying to play forwards. It all sort of culminated in that Lillestrøm game, and then it just went a little bit flat. I think teams got a little bit smart to us. They sat off a little bit more, and we struggled a little bit to break down lower teams. And I think it was just, it was a bit of like the 23 Ham Kam near the end. It just swung a bit too much. On the ball, it looked like we only up on goal difference. That's the fact. But in reality, we probably, we could have got more points if we've perhaps dealt with it a little bit differently. So I think it was a reminder, useful one for the club, that if you start going away from what has made you successful, there's a big length to fall. But I also think that I still think that they'll be even better again this year. I still think that they'll take steps. We played them in a friendly. Was it 2 weeks ago now? And I would say that there were already things there that are different from when I was there, to show that they want to progress again. So I think that the elite team is going to be interesting this year, because I think there's a few teams in there now that you would say are a bit unfancied. So you have KFUM, who had a fantastic year last year, finished 7th or 8th in the table. You have Brinna, who are newly promoted, that no one probably ever heard of outside of Norway. You have Kristiansund, that somehow managed to stay up with, despite selling half their squad through the year. Haugesund have struggled financially and had to move some players on. Sandefjord always seem to sort of find a way. So I think that the split in the league now is starting to get a bit more defined, but not necessarily bigger. Like a Goodser can be a fantastic year or have a disappointing year. Vålerenga, you'd expect to have a good year. Fredrikstad, are they going to have a good year, or are they going to have a disappointing year? Sarpsborg seem to go round swings and roundabouts. So I think the mid-table part of the league now has got a lot bigger, that it could really open up. And you saw that firstly, how tight the league was in general, and secondly, how many points you needed to not get in that relegation playoff. There's never been, I think 32 was the highest before last season to have that relegation playoff. So to get 33 points and be in danger, that's never been heard of on that way. Take the part of OBOS. Consequence of that is OBOS is extremely competitive. You have Lillestrøm and Odd, who are two very traditional rich clubs. You still have Ålesund kicking around in there, and they look revitalised with Stjørdals-Blink and Geir Frigård, and they've also got a history of taking Ham Kam up. Stabæk seem to have realised that they perhaps were a little bit too young last year, and have signed some experience, and mixed with their young players could really be exciting this year. Start have made some decent signings in this window. Sogndal have got Lewis Pimenta as a coach, which could also be exciting. So there's really the OBOS this year is going to be really, really competitive, which is great for Norwegian products. The OBOS Ligaen has always been defined as the Kokos Ligaen, which basically means the crazy league, because it's usually full of goals and drama and excitement, and you don't really know what's going to happen. But I think that the gap between top and bottom now in that league is getting quite big, in the sense of the financials. But a lot of the teams in OBOS now are very, very well coached, very, very modern in the way they think, very good at finding their way. So the clubs that don't have as much money are very good to bring through young players, very good to recruit from the leagues below, very good to have a clear strategy of how to go forward. So Scheid and Hood are the two promoted teams this year. Very different ways of playing, but very, very good at what they were last year, despite doing that. Scheid have a female manager, so she'll be the first female manager to be in the Norwegian professional men's game. So I think the level of OBOS is going to be really, really high this year, which from a selfish perspective is not good news for us, because it means that we're going to have to fight and battle and be the underdogs again. But it also gives us a fantastic motivation and to want to do well. And in terms of what we want to do, we just want to surprise again. I'm pretty sure when the table tips start coming out, we're going to be tipped probably 13th, 14th. They've been tipped that for the last 5 years and ended up being anything from 7th to 11th. So we're gonna do our thing. We're gonna be smart. We're gonna work really, really hard. Make sure that we are realistic in what we want to do. So last year they played the back five, were very difficult to break down, but scored probably too few goals. The club have made a decision to change strategy. They want to go back to a more traditional 4-3-3, which is one of the reasons that they wanted to appoint me, because they want to bring back the model of being able to bring in players, produce players, whether that's outside or within, and then be able to sell them on. That's easier in a system and a way of playing that is more attractive, using inverted commas. So we're just going to have to work the hardest that any OBOS team can do, and have a team that people can get behind and produce the profiles that mean that the club can continue to run and we can continue to be in OBOS next year.
Yeah, there's some big clubs in that league, and obviously you avoid Vålerenga, who walked the league last year pretty much, and have gone back up. But yeah, like you mentioned, there's still some big clubs to compete against. From your time at Blink to your time now, has your philosophy in terms of how you look to, you just mentioned 4-3-3 there, for example, has your philosophy in terms of how you're looking to look to manage the season changed at all? And talk to us a little bit about the squad and maybe the strength of the squad and how you've had to approach recruitment as well. You mentioned there's a small staff there. Talk to us about that side of things, how you've had to sort of look at things heading into this 2025 season.
I'm a much more of a realist now than I was when I was in Blink. I joined Blink from Bodø winning their first gold medal in the Eliteserien in 2020. So I was like, this is the recipe. Just do this, and we're going to be good. And I probably didn't factor enough that the mentality of the club has been always one, like you said, that we're underdogs. So trying to ask underdogs to dominate a game with the ball is tricky. It takes time. Asking a club to find that balance. That year in 2020, Blink were extremely good at scoring goals, but also conceded a lot of goals. So trying to find that balance was also tricky. And as I said, I tried to probably go in with the Glimt recipe and try and change, even though they played 4-3-3 before Blink, try and change too much too quickly, and was unrealistic with what I wanted to do. This time, having had some time to reflect, time to work with Jakob, and also to understand, like, for example, playing as a back five. I have a much better understanding now of how back five teams work, having done it for 3 years in Ham Kam. So my 4-3-3 now looks a little bit different. And it's also about what you're coming to. So Raufoss are known for a long time to being an extremely hard-working team. And as I said, they changed strategy with how they wanted to play. When they were at their most successful, Raufoss under Christian Jonsson, they were known for being extremely offensive, extremely aggressive, one of the best trained teams in the league. And they would rather win games 5-3 than 1-0. We aren't going to be able to get there in one step to be the fully offensive tiki-taka Barcelona way of football, when Raufoss last year were statistically the worst team on the ball in the league in many categories. If they weren't the worst, they were the next worst. And that's all things from goals scored, touches in the box, possession, forward passes, final third entries, whatever you want to call it. So we have to now work on making a bit better with the ball. If you flip it the other way, Raufoss are the third best defence in the league. So they know how to defend in a 5. And we have to be able to do that in a 4 now without being too naive with it. So the biggest thing that I've said in my interviews, and then what I've said to the media, and I've said to the players, I've said to everybody, the biggest thing that we have to do this year is we have to make small steps without going knee deep, going in 2-footed. So our aim is not to be the best on the ball this year, but our aim is to have a very clear way of what we're going to try and do with the ball. And then we have to be smart.
Just on that, if you look at European football on a wider level, and I think we briefly mentioned this before you came on there, look into like sort of a team like Manchester United and Ruben Amorim, because you've mentioned there about the philosophy, and you've learned how to sort of play as a five at the back, or you've learned different styles, or how to play against different styles. When you come into a new job, how adaptable do you have to be? Because obviously that's one of the major talking points, isn't it, around Europe at the moment in terms of Amorim sort of 3-4-3, and he's just gone in and he's like, I'm not changing. This is my style. Like, adapt to it and deal with it, despite all the results sort of like struggling and that kind of thing. Do you have a take on that kind of approach versus like how you said how you've maybe evolved your style and how you're going to look to approach your Raufoss team? Do you need to adapt your philosophy to the players, or do you need to stick to your philosophy and then try and get the recruitment right to surround and do the players that you want? What's your view on that? You don't have to necessarily comment on United, but just in general.
I think it comes down to its clarity between you and the board. So when I had the first conversation with the club said, we want to play 4-3-3 next year. That's a club decision. That's a decision that's been taken out of my hand. And they're trying to appoint a coach that fits that. My job then is to go back to the club during the process and say, this is how I would do it.
Do you mean during the interview? Do you mean during the interview process, or like literally in the process?
Yeah, So in the interview process, my task given by the club was to look at the current squad, and say how I would use it in a 4-3-3, and what I felt that if we were to recruit, then what do we need to recruit? Where do we need to recruit? Why do we need to recruit? So
from that point of view, then, is there more than one interview in that sense? Is it kind of like you said? Do you have to go away and think about it, come back, or present something, or how?
The first interview was on the phone. Yeah, so the first interview was on the phone, and that was more the chief exec grounding me, sort of basically saying, like, finding out the things I'm saying with not a lot of preparation, I would say, does that fit with what they're looking for as a profile? So that was things about, like, how would you manage the squad? We want to play 4-3-3 next year. What's your first thoughts on that? What's important for you as a head coach? Like, how do you, like we discussed earlier, are you analytical? Are you a people person? Are you a manager? Etc., etc. And then after that conversation, it was said to me then, right, come and present to us how Raufoss 25 looks like in your image. So then we met in person, and I presented what I thought it would look like. I presented where I felt we needed to strengthen and what types we needed to strengthen. And then when we got to the final part, then it was more a case of then, okay, we like what you're presenting, but what does that look like now? So what's the first 100 days look like? What's the first period look like? How are you going to get from there to there? So for me, it was really important to say that, like, you know, it's all good saying we're going to play offensive football and sort of blood and thunder football. But if that's what you want, we can't do that in one step. So if that's what you want, that's fine. But I'm not the man. I can't do that. That's not how I think it should be done. And that's as much then about interviewing the club as the club is interviewing you then. So I imagine if you take the United example, I would imagine somewhere in the background there was some discussion about recruitment looking different in this window than it happened. But I would also say that what's happened is that there's a lot of, like, Rashford is the easy example, where Ruben's gone, he doesn't fit what I want to do, and therefore then they've managed to remove him from the squad, which means then that frees up financially for maybe bringing that left wing back they got in. But also it means that come the summer, you can already, I imagine there'll be quite a lot of change. And I know it was discussed in the media that Ruben originally wanted to take the job at the end of the season, not in the season. I imagine then to use the 6 months to look at United from afar and make those decisions. So I think from that side, in terms of the recruitment process as a coach, it's very much a lot about, is it a club? Does the club have a very strong way of playing that they want to stick to? Or is it very much dictated by they want the best person for the job and therefore they're happy to go? So I use Ham Kam again as an example, that Ham Kam traditionally set was a 4-4-2 club for many, many years. But then they appointed Shetter Rekdal and he plays a back five. No one has kicked a fuss about the back five in Ham Kam for the last however many years, because they've only ever got success. They're playing Eliteserien, which 5 years ago they would never have dreamed of. They got promoted out of OBOS, which at that time would never have dreamed of. So that was a club steered thing then about this is where it's the manager that decides. Whereas Raufoss in this example said we want to play 4-3-3. That's then a club steered thing to say we're going to do it this way. We need to find a coach that fits this profile.
So going back to the Rashford example, like you just mentioned there, do you think then that based on what you know in management, it would be more of a manager's decision to sort of like decide on that player, or the club's decision to say, listen, we don't want this player in our squad anymore, he's paid too much or whatever, for whatever reason? You know, if you were judging on that one particular example, or, you know, in similar cases, like in terms of your experience so far, is that something you've come across? Or
I would imagine that somewhere in the interview process for Ruben to United, there must have been a common understanding of who has the final say on the squad. So if Ruben goes around and says, I don't want this player in the squad anymore, then I can't believe, like, I don't think this would have happened as it's happened now if the club they didn't say, well, we'll make an effort then to fix that. And I think that's also then been backed by other examples in the time that's been where, you know, he's dropped players, he's rotated players, there's other players like Garnacho have been missing for a period of time, where he's been very clear that I'm going to use this group of players, and the club have basically let him get on with it. Whereas in other clubs, it might well be that if they drop someone, the club might turn around and say, well, hang on a minute, you have to play him, he's our best played player, or he's a local player, or whatever. So I would imagine in that example, there must have been a common understanding during the interview process that if Ruben made a decision he wanted the player to leave, the club would back him to do it. And if not, then Ruben would have to accept then that this was a group of players I've got, and therefore I need to make it work. And then you might look at then the system and how you make it work and when you change. I knew from looking at the Raufoss squad that a lot of them had played 4-3-3 before, and that there was a couple of players that could fit either or positions. So they could either play as a midfielder, but they could also maybe play as a winger, or they maybe could play as a fullback, but they could also play as a central defender, or they could play as a deep midfielder, but they could also play as an A. So this pre-season for me then has been about trying players in different roles, to finding out which one suits them best for the way I want to do it, and also then which one suits them best for the total balance of the team. That was the understanding I had. We don't have the finances to go and sell anyone we want and buy anyone we want. We have to be clever in our recruitment and where we look and how we look. And that was, I knew that coming into the job. So therefore, you know, if a player gets sold, and I might not always have the say of who that player is, then I have to accept that because there's bigger mechanisms at work for the club. The club being able to sell for money is a big thing for the club. So, you know, we might be having a great season, and then they might say, we've had a bid for a couple of million for a player, we're going to accept it because that's more important for the club. And then we might be able to reinvest some of that money into the team. But the way we want to play now should act as a way to be able to further strengthen the club's economy, further strengthen the club's reputation as being a springboard club to be able to progress, and hopefully then a position where we can start producing. You know, we have 3 or 4 young players now on contract between the ages of 16 and 18. So we need to make sure we have space for them in our squad as well, so that they can make the way into senior football. Then hopefully they get the springboard as well.
Yeah, that leads me to my next question. Actually, there's a couple more questions. You mentioned that management's changed and sort of, you know, being from the pathway from Blink to now. You know, how the managerial departments are comprised as well in terms of staffing. How has sort of scouting and recruitment changed, if at all, from the time at Blink? And that could just be because you're at a different club, maybe a slightly bigger club.
No, it's changed.
How's
It's changed in the sense that, well, it's changed very much easily that clubs are recruiting scouts more. Clubs are using Y Scout more. Clubs are using data more. You know, Tromsø have been the model for the last few years of how to recruit for a system. That they've had a very, very clear way of playing. They have very clear characteristics they want their players in each position to have, and they've been able to go and get hold of them and then make it work. So, you know, Lasse Nordås from Glimt is a prime example of having a strong number 9. They've now sold to Luton for X amount. They've sold 2 African defenders, 1 wing back and 1 central defender, who were very, very raw, but they've used time to develop them. And then they've sold them for big money. They signed Vetle Sjarvik from Lillestrøm, who was a Ham Kam player before, that would fit perfect for them. Leo Kornic, the same, high attacking wing back, perfect for them. So I think what's changed is that clubs are now looking less at the name and the bottom line of the name, the salary, and where they're coming from, and instead are looking much better to see, right, we need our central defenders to do these things in order. These are the characteristics we need to have the central defenders to have. And then you can go and find players that fit that profile from lower leagues or obscure leagues to be able to then fit in, that maybe aren't as fancied as other people might think. So again, Glimt, the title year they got, recruited Sondre Fett from Ålesund, who was on the bench for Ålesund, who were finished bottom that year. They signed him because of his ability to running behind as an 8. He'd always come in the box late. He had a lot of energy and he'd be able to press. So for Glimt's system, that was perfect. For Ålesund, that didn't quite fit the way they played, because at that time they played a back 5. So then it was allowed them to recruit. Molde signed a central defender from Glimt the other way, Isak Amundsen, who historically doesn't fit a back 5 very well, but they're going to play a back 4 this year, Molde. So if he's going to play a back 4 in Molde, he's going to have a superb season, I'm sure of it. So I think scouting and recruitment has become a lot less about names, and, you know, the role of agents has changed a little bit. It's become a lot more about, this is how we want to play. These are the characteristics that best suit the positions we have in our way of playing. This is what we need to go and find. So, for example, for us,
yeah, that's what I was going to say. In your role as well, is that looking ahead to this season, how you're doing your recruitment during this off season as well? Does that apply?
Well, at the moment, it's like we've got, for the first time, Raufoss has actually got quite a few players under contract. There's been times in years gone by where like 6 players have met up for the first day of pre-season because everyone's gone out of contract, and you've got 10 trialists and 4 juniors and 6 players who are your own players. This year they've had, I think it was between 18 and 20 on contract, of which 3 of them are really young players. So they're not senior players yet, but you should have to make space for them. We had a couple go out on contract that we've let go. And obviously, as I said, at the same time, we've changed systems. So the obvious one is that we didn't have any natural wingers in the squad, we thought. So the original thought was we need to find some natural wingers. But we've actually found out that maybe we've got some already in the squad that when you change the role definitions, suit it really well. we've signed 2 midfielders, one who's very experienced, Ulam and Sveen, and one who's very young in Jonas Selnes, who both have the capacity to cover a lot of ground, which was important for me if we were going to press. So that's an example of where our recruitment strategy has been very clear for our midfielders. They need to have the ability to cover ground. And therefore, then we've got one in with experience because he's local, but he's also very, very good. And we've got a young one who we recruited from the league below based on the fact that we knew he could cover ground. That's you can see with the eye. But he's also scored, I think it was 7 goals last year and got 5 assists for someone that's only 20 years old. So that fitted then what we wanted. So I think even at our level, like, yes, as I said, we can't buy players. We can't go out and financially use money on a transfer fee. But there are still a lot of players out there if you're willing to look and willing to have clarity behind it of exactly what characteristics you need for your team and what's important. And as I said, for us, we want wingers that can threaten in behind. We want deep midfielders that can cover ground. We want fullbacks that can defend well 1-against-1. We want central defenders that can handle defending out on the sides if they have to. We want a striker that could be a focal point. We have a sort of idea of what we want the positions to look like. So if we end up losing anybody, then we know already then what characteristics we want to find if we have to replace them. And that, for a club like us, is so important.
And is that set by yourself or is that set by the club?
Both. Because obviously for me, it's my way of playing, even though there's one way with the system, but the characteristics I require in certain positions, it can also differ from coach to coach. So I have to be clear to the club what I expect from each position. The club then has to be very clear on the direction they want to go. So if they want a team that plays 4-3-3, then I have to accept that. And therefore then I have to work within that. So it always has to be a both. Like the head coach will always have a say, or should always have a say, on the players they signed, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that have to play the players. If there's no point having someone you use a lot of money on and then put him on the bench every week because he doesn't fit how you want to play. But at the same time, a successful club management means that they should be able to put the different wheels in place to make the club or the team function. So as I said, the Tromsø have been the clear example of that they've had different coaches in recent years, but they've had the same sporting director, and he's been able to find the players that fit that the best. Glimt have done it well, but obviously when they've had more money, they've had more room to get things wrong, because they have so much money, they can just make a mistake here and there. Fredrikstad are extremely good at it. Again, they've now come to a situation where they've got into Europe and they have a bit more money going around. Sarpsborg for a long time have been very, very good at it. So I think there's a lot more clubs now that are club driven, and therefore then the managers are appointed to fit into that ideal. And of course there will be exceptions, because if you take the England role just as an easy example, Thomas Tuchel has been brought in because he's a winner. Does he fit exactly how England have played the last few years? Sort of. He's not English, so it doesn't fit that part of the brief. But he's been brought in because he's a winner. And that's a slight deviation from the FA then to be able to do that. But it's no different from international football to club football, that at some point, someone will get appointed because they want to win games. Molde is another example. They've played a back five for a long, long time. They've always talked about going back to a back four this year, but they've now appointed a coach who can play a back four, and that's been part of the reason he's been appointed.
A couple of final questions, Tom. One on success, one on leadership. So what would success look like for you this season at Raufoss?
Success this year would be that we are, worst case, still in OBOS, best case in the playoffs to go up, but that we do it in a way that is more in keeping with how Raufoss wants to identify itself. So as I said, I've only ever known Raufoss teams to be extremely hardworking, extremely awkward to play against, want to play forward in a 4-3-3. They've had sporting success the last couple of years doing that, but they've done it in a slightly different way. It's not to take anything away, because Jürgen did a great job with the players he had, and he was very good to get the most out of very little. So success for us this year would be able to do it more in a traditional Ham Kam Raufoss way than perhaps before, while still being able to punch above our weight against some of the bigger dogs in OBOS.
Fantastic. And on leadership, I did send you something earlier about introverted leadership, but I was in the middle of recording, so you've probably not seen it. Because you talked about how you as a leader, you didn't think maybe you could be a head coach because of your perception of what a head coach is, and maybe you are slightly different to that in terms of personality. But obviously, you've clearly learned from what you've said that you've learned that you can do it in a different way and that you can still be effective as a leader. So talk to me about leadership from that point of view. What are the key attributes you've learned as a leader, if you know what I mean? And how did you do that? Was it maybe through books, through influences, through people that you've maybe met along the way, potentially maybe, Ham Kam, for example? What were the things that you did to sort of upgrade your leadership and learn about your own leadership style and how you applied that to your team? And is there any tips that you would give to others similar to you did in terms of, how to manage?
I think leadership is something that it has so many different forms now. So it goes back to what I said about coaching. The first thing is you have to find out what your way is. And a lot of successful leadership is about being able to marry up your beliefs with what the group needs you to be. Because leading is basically standing forward and taking them in a direction. So I didn't believe, as I said, I could be a big leader because I felt that I was too democratic, not autocratic enough. I wanted too much. I wanted to hear what you thought of. Well, this is what I'm thinking of the team. What do you think? But I think what you realise over time is that a lot of leadership comes down to very simple things, which is that you have to deliver trust. You have to deliver trust to yourself. You have to deliver trust to your staff. You have to deliver trust to your players. You have to deliver an element of openness that you're approachable, but on the same time, they know there's a line. They know there's a line where, you can't take the mickey. You can't go over that line. You have to set clear boundaries. My 3 non-negotiables, I hear a lot to a certain podcast with a certain Jake, without promoting that podcast. And they always talk about 3 non-negotiables. So on my very first day in Raufoss, I made it very clear what my 3 non-negotiables were. And that was that I will always communicate as well as I can, as honestly as I can. That would mean that I would take those difficult conversations and I will approach you and I'll try and be ahead of things from a communicative perspective. But I only ever give you honest feedback. Now, honest doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to be what you want to hear, but then you at least know it's honest. And if I make a mistake or if I get something wrong, I'll also be honest enough to say I got that wrong. That's also an element now, I think, in modern coaching that's important. You can't do it too much. You can't say it too much, but you have to be willing to do it at the right times. The second one was we, not me. So it's about understanding that I will take responsibility for the planning of sessions, the group setting, the atmosphere around the group, the culture. I will take responsibility of setting that together, but you also as players have to contribute to that. You also have to take responsibility to make that function. So we talked about, for example, that usually in football clubs, it's always the youngest players that have to pick up the equipment at the end of the session, or it's always the youngest players that have to go and move the stuff. I now fine every player in the squad if there's any equipment left on the pitch after training, because it's about us. It's not the youngsters haven't done a bad job. It's about we haven't taken responsibility as a group. Someone walking past a cone because they go, well, that's not my job. That's a very, very small example, but it's a characteristic that can easily spread. We don't have that. We can't have that. So the second one is we, not me. And then the last one is that every single training and game counts. So even if it's a recovery session, even if it's the first training after a week's vacation, even if it's the first friendly of the new year or the year, we're going to play everybody 45 minutes and we're going to mix it up and everything, it still matters. It still counts. So we can't waste it. We haven't got time to waste it. I was very clear with that on my first presentation to the players, which then sets the tone then for the way I want to lead. And I think that, you know, I have been very clear on the pitch at times that this is not how we're going to do it, or there's been very clear about, you know, someone's forgotten, had the wrong equipment for training, or we had a not the best training session a week and a half ago, and I was very clear that it wasn't good enough. That comes with experience, because you know then you need to have that side of you as a coach to raise the standards as you need. And I think that was the misconception when I started thinking about coaching at senior level, that I had to be like that all the time. And actually that doesn't work anymore. Like to be a coach, you have to understand, there's a set of culture where everyone gets what you stand for as a person, and you have to understand when to push the right button. So those times that you are a little bit more annoyed, you know, you're a bit more annoyed, and then 15 minutes later you can go in and talk about something else and everything's okay. That's how it needs to be. In the same way as when a player gets annoyed they've lost in a small-sided game at the end of training, and then 10 minutes later they can look forwards. So that for me has been the biggest learnings that have come while still not losing myself. I still feel that I am approachable. I still feel like I am the personality that I present myself to the group every day is the same one that I present to my wife at home, or my family at home, or whatever. And that was the most important realization for me as a leader, that I needed to understand that everyone has it different. And that's my strength. I couldn't, like, Jakob has a much different style of management than I do. If I try and be Jakob, then I'll fail. I won't succeed. If Jakob tries to be me, he'll fail. He won't succeed. It's about understanding what gets the best out of from you to the group, and how you can then use it.
Fascinating stuff as always, Tom. We've passed the hour mark, so I'm going to have to wrap this up, let you go. Thank you so much. We'll be keeping an eye on your progress. I know that we'll have you back on soon. But yeah, no.
Hopefully I'm still in a job, because this is the most scary part of being a manager is that it's not always my choice now if I'm still in a job or not. So hopefully I'm still in a job.
Well, if you perform how like you performed in this podcast, then I'm sure you'll still be in a job for many years to come. Really good insights, and I've no doubt you'll be fine. And there's always a place for you here if it doesn't work out. So
I've heard the pay's not as good though. That's the problem.
No, I don't think so. Definitely not. Good stuff. No, thanks a lot, Tom. Also, you can find you on Twitter. You can find us on Twitter as well, at Nordic Football, or X, as it's called now. Some people are moving to Blue Sky. I don't know where you sit on that whole debate. But for now, yeah, still on Twitter, and also on the YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe Nordic Football Podcast on YouTube. And we'll be back very soon. Thank you, Tom, once again. Good luck with everything at Raufoss, and we'll be cheering you on. You promised me a trip out to visit you, so I'm still going to hold you to that, by the way.
You just got to get out. It's your call now. I've given the responsibility to you. It's now up to you to fulfill.
You've extended the invite, which is very kind of you. So yeah, we will, once the weather's a bit warmer, I think maybe we'll be out there. Thank you so much, Tom. Have a good afternoon, and thank you to everyone for listening.